meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Gomez.
Here.
Director Chan.
Present.
Director Patterson.
Present.
Director Katz.
Here.
Director Lenny.
Here.
Director Young.
Here.
President McIntosh.
Here. We move to the public comment portion of this agenda. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard now. Comments on agenda items will be heard when the item is up for consideration. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments? I have 2 cards for here in person.
And
Anyone online?
I do have a hand online.
All right.
Which do you prefer to do first?
Let's do the online first.
Okay.
And you have 3 minutes.
Okay, Joe Pangelinin, are you able to unmute your mic?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Joe Pangelina, and I am the Chief Steward of AFSCME Local 444. We are experiencing some issues when a potential workplace violence incident is being investigated at EBMUD. Required Safety Practice 6000 and Security Protocol 1.5 have processes in place to ensure incidents are thoroughly investigated so workplace violence does not occur. The document even details managers and supervisors, quote, enforce the rules fairly and uniformly. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is the opposite. When a 444 member is being investigated, it seems the investigation is performed to check all boxes to ensure discipline can be imposed. The questions being asked are not trying to get to the truth, but to confirm the conclusion security has already arrived on. When a supervisor is investigated, it is apparent the investigation is not thorough or even taken seriously. The 444 member who complained about the supervisor's behavior is told things like, I am kind of leaning towards this not being workplace violence, but my boss is going to make the decision. Or being told, I am playing devil's advocate while management plays these work games. Security and the district is acting as if a supervisor cannot possibly be the exhibitor of inappropriate, retaliatory, or potentially violent behavior. If all district supervisors made good, sound decisions daily while respecting our contract, I would be out of a job as chief steward. The main concern we have is that security is the judge and jury for all investigations. There is no appeal process, and after the security report is generated, the department sees it as absolute fact. They then base their decision to impose discipline on this document. The union agrees that any potential workplace violence, including disruptive, threatening, or violent speech and/or behavior, should be investigated. What should not happen is the process being weaponized unfairly against your blue-collar workforce, while your white-collar supervisory employees get a pass. We would like this to be a fair and transparent process that includes an employee's right to appeal. We want all employees to be treated fairly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Last speaker online?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll move to the speakers here in person. First speaker, Yvette Rivera. And this is a non-agenda item.
I'm sorry, a hand came up, so we can take it after
All
Ms.
right.
Rivera. Okay.
Thank you. Is this the right speaker? I mean, is this the right mic? I provided you an email that I sent out this morning. When I arrived to work, I had an email from Catherine Tate, EEO representative, and I thought it was necessary for the board to see my response. I did not include the content of her email, but I did provide you what my response was. On the top, you'll see the Civil Rights Department letter of right to sue. On the top of that letter, I put in the text, Cindy Sharon, East Bay MUD HR Director, on April the 17th, 2024, stated I could seek any legal remedy I wished regarding a bad faith classification study. So I get an email this morning that references, lo and behold, the bad faith classification study. I put in a red box what the what the Civil Rights Department wrote, and I'm going to read it right now. The EEOC is responsible for processing of this complaint. Please contact EEOC directly for any discussions of this complaint or the investigation. And as a sidebar, I want everybody in the district to know that now it's 3 years that employees get to file DFEH complaints. And since I'll be at East Bay MUD for 2 more years, I'm going to let DFEH investigate the continued retaliation outside of the bad faith classification study. Please take note of number 5. I suggest East Bay MUD stop engaging in retaliation. I've been through about 8 East Bay MUD investigations, including when you hired Mr. Noski, a previous general counsel at another agency that allegedly resigned after an EEOC incident. And all were found without merit and in East Bay MUD's favor. I believe a jury will agree that the process is a futile one. We shall see. That's why I will be letting EEOC and DFEH handle this matter and matters in the future. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Eric Larson, 444. And Eric, it says agenda item number 3, but then it says evaluation of general counsel.
Yes, thank you, President McIntosh. My name is Eric Larson. I'm president of AFSCME Local 444. I did want to provide comments on your closed session agenda item number 3, which is the evaluation of general counsel. I don't have much interaction with Mr. McDonald, and Derek, if I may call him Derek, may be a very fine attorney and provide a good value for the district. But I have had, and I do have perhaps too much interaction with his staff in the context of arbitrations and PERB charges. Arbitrations and PERB charges that we, the union, has offered what we believed to have been very fair and very reasonable settlement proposals to avoid arbitrations or PERB hearings, only to be rejected and forced into the hearings. Arbitrations over shift differential, contract language, which was very clear and evidentiary. Arbitrations over work out of class, contract language, which was also clear and evidentiary. PERB charges against the district for failing to negotiate with us over mandatory subjects of bargaining. PERB charges where the district's contractor attorney from Navia's law firm accused Local 444 of filing the charges simply because we were mad that we didn't do a good job when we were negotiating our contract. I mean, she literally said that to us. And OGC has further stopped management and employee relations from settling disputes with us because of pending PERB charges that have not yet been heard. This is expensive. It's expensive both to union and it's expensive to the district. So I do ask you in the performance evaluation to ask Mr. McDonald how much the district is spending on contract labor attorneys and how much time Mr. McDonald is spending coaching his staff attorneys on the Malaus, Myers, and Brown Act, the law. and ask Mr. McDonald to ask his staff and the Office of General Counsel to work with the unions at finding solutions and finding remedy rather than fighting against us, because when we fight, we win. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So let's move to the person online.
Okay, and then I also just received another speaker card for closed session item number 3 from Ms. Rivera, so.
All right. Let's do the person
Online?
online.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Casey, you should be able to unmute and you'll have
Okay, thank you.
3 minutes.
Thank you so much, members of the board. Okay, so I just wanted to, speak on this item. I too, coming from 2019, am asking for there to be a closer look at the evaluation processes here. We are also having many of the same issues that you heard Joe and Eric speak on. So I just, if you see something, you say something. And I just didn't want it to go through, because we do get a lot of, it's just complaining employees now. And we're just unhappy. And we are getting unhappy, but it's not just out of the blue, it's with purpose, because it does seem like our relationships are eroding here at the district. So I just wanted to speak on behalf of 2019 to concur and let the board know that what Joe and Eric speak of in the current relationships between the district and its staff and its unions is very, very much alive and unwell. Thank you.
Casey, can you please state your full name?
Oh, yes. It's Casey Evans, EVANS.
Thank you, Casey. All right, Yvette Rivera.
Thank you. Is this the right one? Yes. I'm speaking about item number 3 also. Director McIntosh, you recently spoke about your frustration surrounding racism at East Bay MUD, and you concluded that racism lives at East Bay MUD. Well, misogyny, retaliation, and discrimination have lifelong residency at East Bay MUD. The board of directors has the keys, but no one gets an eviction notice. Every room in that house has a party every August when all of the people with power get bonuses. Last year, I believe, General Counsel got an 8% raise. I may be mistaken, but I recall remembering the number 8 because other people called me and said, can you believe it? General Counsel got an 8% raise. The district just lost a jury decision. But Mr. McDonald got an 8% raise when employees don't get 8% raises. And on top of the 8%, I think every year union employees get raises. I'm not sure about this, but I think all senior management team members also get a raise. So when is that going to stop? Where the people in that house get raises, bonuses, awards, and the support of this board of directors that owns the keys. Thank you. I hope some evictions come because this is, out of hand. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. I believe that's our last speaker. Yes. All right. So the board will now convene to conference room 8 to discuss closed session agenda items 1 through 3 and is scheduled to return here for the regular meeting at 1:15. We are now adjourned. August 27th, 2024, regular business meeting of the East Bay MUD Board of Directors. We will receive reports from this morning's Finance Administration Committee meeting under item 13. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Chan?
Present.
Director Gomez?
Here.
Director Katz?
Here.
Director Linney?
Here.
Director Patterson?
Present.
Director Young?
Here.
President McIntosh?
Here, please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll now turn it over to Director Go. Why don't we do the closed session report first? This is a report out of closed session for today, August 27, 2024. Due to time constraints, the board did not hold the annual performance evaluation of the general counsel during today's closed session, and will continue the evaluation to the September 10th, 2024 closed session meeting. There are no other announcements from closed session. All right. Now, I will now turn this meeting over to Director Gomez to recognize National Hispanic Heritage Month. And pronounce it for me. Fuerza Latina. All right. Latina Affinity Group. Director Gomez.
Thank you so much. So Fuerza Latina, also known as the Latin Heritage Committee, was founded in 1996 to promote Latin culture, enhance visibility, and educate district staff through art, food, music, crafts, and history. Fuerza Latina plays a vital role in our culturally diverse agency and supports the district's mission and goals of serving the public and representing our community. In honor of Latin Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th, Fuerza Latina is hosting events to highlight different aspects of Latin and Hispanic culture. This year's theme is Hispanic Influencers in Northern California. Our planned activities include an opening ceremony featuring a performance by the district staff band Los Lodos. I love the name. In case you don't know what lodo means, it's actually a word for mud, so it's perfect. Weekly trivia, Jeopardy game, loteria, travel series, presentations on Costa Rica, Tijuana, and El Salvador at the Administration Building and Upcountry, Café con Leche, Spanish class, and these events will provide opportunities for district staff to learn about and celebrate our rich Latin and Hispanic history and culture. We, the Board of Directors, encourage your support of Fuerza Latina and Latin Heritage Month, and it is a pleasure to have been invited to a number of the events that will be happening during that month, and I will be happy to participate, and I encourage others on the board to do as well. So thank you very much for all your activities regarding Fuerza Latina, and looking forward to celebrating together.
Thank you, Director Gomez. That moves us to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard now. Comments on agenda items will be heard when the item is up for consideration. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
There is one online, and it looks like there might be one in the room.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead with the one online.
Okay.
Good morning.
Okay. Casey, your time will start now.
Thank you. Casey Evans here, employee in Local 2019, exiting Chief Stewart. So thank you for taking the time to hear my comments today. To those of you who know me, I do like to keep it positive. So I would like to start with some thank you. So, I do want to say thank you to the retiring board, and thank you for the time and the efforts that you have put in here. They have been felt and they are acknowledged. So to all of you who are going off into retirement, I wish you the best, and just want to let you know that your time here was felt and appreciated. To the new board members, welcome aboard. Hopefully you're here to stay for as many decades as the other ones have. So we are happy to have you aboard and to hopefully work together as we move forward. I'd like to thank Ms. Rivera for her endless persistence. You are appreciated, ma'am, and you are heard. I always want to thank the employees. As I say, the best part about EBMUD is its staff. And so I thank everybody from the field to the dispatch centers, to the surveyors, to the engineers, to the schedulers, to the admins, many, many, many of them. We thank you for your service and for your dedication, and for the duty of loyalty, as was brought up earlier, that you have shown the district. And I want to send a special thank you out to Bill. Bill, if I was in there, I would have been leaping over, hugging you this afternoon. I appreciate that you recognize that we did go without a raise. You know, it's easily forgotten and it's nice to be remembered. And that the relationship between the union and the district is vital and very important. So I appreciate your collaborative effort. I wish you nothing but happiness, and I thank you for recognizing us.
Thank you.
So I am here today to speak as I've recently been 2019 chief steward for a 6-month period. And, you know, during that 6-month period, I have to say I did become, you know, a little concerned with, you know, the erosion of the knowledge and credibility that is given within these halls and to the staff. They are your most valuable resource that you have here. You know, and I also became a little bit concerned about who's looking out for the district. So I just, you know, I want to thank everybody who has come together and spoken to me and, you know, helped me trying to figure out this issue, from Clifford to Deary to Barry, Sophia. So I do appreciate that we've been able, Andrew, you know, to have conversations about this, but I hope that we can continue and move forward with some actionable items to make this a better place and get back to some collaboration in the interest of East Bay Mud. There seems to be, you know, a boots versus suits thing that's going on now, and it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable and it's concerning. So, you know, I just wanted to come and thank everyone. My time is up, but again, thank you guys for all that you do.
Thank you, Casey. I have one card for public comment, and Yvette Rivera. 2 issues, general comments about EEO email and also election for Luz Gomez on
Thank you for
ballot.
reading the card. I'm going to be adding a little bit if I have time. Thank you, Director McIntosh. So I provided a couple of documents today. One was an EEO email from Mr. Derry Moten's employee, Catherine Tate. And I told the board this morning that, and I provided the Civil Rights Department memo or email or document that says the EEOC is responsible for processing the complaint. Please contact EEOC directly for any discussion of this complaint or the investigation. I also added that Cindy Sharon, the East Bay Mud HR director, I've never heard of this happening at any agency I've ever worked at, on April the 17th, 2024, stated that I could seek any legal remedy I wanted regarding regarding what I termed the bad faith classification study. I also add that any communications from her department are going to be, regarding my complaints of retaliation, are going to be investigated by an outside agency, because I've been through 8 investigations and all of them have fallen on the side of the district. So I'll leave it in the hands of EOC. The other document I just gave you is the one that says the economic election costs, estimated election costs for Ward 2 are $200,000, and this is the ward that Luz Gomez is going to have her name on the ballot for. Now, in all fairness to Ms. Gomez, she may not, I mean, she's assuming that it's going to be $200,000. So I wrote an email to the district asking for the historical cost of having an incumbent board director's name on a ballot, and I wanted to know the year East Bay Mud spent taxpayer or ratepayer money, the name of the director that was on the ballot, and how much money East Bay Mud spent on each candidate that was an incumbent. And I mentioned this morning that Director Andy Katz, I'm sure there were others that were basically grandfathered in the board. I mean, there was a law that East Bay Mud worked on to save the taxpayers' money. And Mr. Katz, Director Katz was, I guess, I want to say grandfathered in, there may be another term. And tons of money was saved as a result. The last thing I wanted to say was, in terms of what Director Lisa McIntosh said last week about she's frustrated, convinced that racism lives at East Bay Mud. This morning I said retaliation, discrimination, misogyny lives at East Bay Mud. And I said the district gives these people a lifelong lease and never evicts anybody. Instead, gives them awards, praises them for their reports that hide the truth, that removes data, and then provides these upper level managers that co-sign on these reports, extended contracts and raises. Nothing is going to change at East Bay Mud until the Board of Directors takes their keys and shows people the door. Thank you, I yield.
Thank you, Yvette. No further public comment?
There are no other hands.
All right, we will now move to the consent calendar to consider items 1 through 8. Are there any comments from the public on the consent calendar items? If none, are there any comments, questions on any of the items 1 through 8 on the consent calendar? Seeing none. All in favor of items 1 through 8?
We need a motion and a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, do we have a motion?
Move it up.
Oh, Bill Patterson,
I'll second.
okay, made the motion, and Doug Lenny made the second. If there's nothing further, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. That's unanimous. That moves us on to determination and discussion.
Thank you, President McIntosh. So next, we want to talk about the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project. As the board is aware, over the last several years, we have been updating both the board and various committees on the project to expand Los Vaqueros. This is a regional project that will expand the reservoir by 115,000 acre-feet. We've evaluated our participation in the project, considering our projected need for water and other potential supplemental supplies available to us. In addition, this project will require several complex agreements to be executed by the JPA members. Today, we'll share with you our preliminary analysis and present several options on our future participation in the project, along with our recommendation. We discussed this project earlier this month with the Planning Committee, who unanimously supported staff's recommendation. So today, we have Senior Civil Engineer Grace Su and Director of Water and Natural Resources Mike Tognolini to lead this discussion.
Good morning, directors.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I knew I would do that because I usually am here in the morning during the planning committee.
Grace, give us a minute. please. Okay, you should be good to go.
Okay. Okay, so today we'll be providing a brief background on the Los Vaqueros expansion project, discuss the district's supplemental water supply alternatives and unit costs, and then provide participation options for the project and recommendations. Project planning has been underway since 2017 for the proposed 115,000 acre-feet expansion of Los Vaqueros Reservoir. This reservoir is owned and operated by Contra Costa Water District. Key project benefits include improving regional water supply reliability and enhancing water supply for wildlife refuges in the Central Valley. The district has requested up to 30,000 acre-feet of dedicated storage capacity, which it could use to store water that can later be used during droughts and emergencies. The Los Vaqueros Reservoir JPA was formed in 2021 and consists of the 8 member agencies that are shown in this map. The agencies are currently at a critical phase of evaluating potential participation in the project. The status of the agencies is summarized in this slide. Most of the agencies are still diligently working on their business cases and are not yet ready to make a participation decision, although CCWD has requested decisions by this fall. Today, we'll be discussing staff's evaluation of the project and the rationale for the recommendations on project participation. CCWD has it was said that they are planning to develop project options for participation in the project based on commitment levels of the member agencies and plans to bring those options to its board on September 18th. The current storage request is oversubscribed by 10,000 acre feet, but some agencies, including the district, have indicated to the JPA that they may reduce its storage request. And then next, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about the need for the project, why we're considering Los Vaqueros in the first place. And that requires us to take a step back and look at our drought planning sequence and our need for water calculation. And as the board may recall, the way that EBMUD calculates its need for water, it considers the most severe drought we've had in our history, which was 1976-77, and we had a third dry year, which is the average of 76 and 77. So it's a 3-year severe drought sequence that we then model using current demands and future projected demands to determine whether or not we have enough water to get through a 3-year drought period. And that at the end of that third year, we would be down at essentially zero water. So the modeling accounts for our conservation and recycling goals. So there's an assumption that we're going to achieve future conservation and recycling. And it also accounts for a 15% rationing target on our customers. So we're aiming for an 85% reliable supply with a 15% rationing. So what this chart shows are the, in 5-year increments, the projected need for water as was reported in our 2020 Urban Water Management Plan document. And that shows ultimately by the year 2050 that we would have a need for water in the third year of a drought of 75 to 84,000 acre feet in that year. Since then, we've done some initial analysis and preliminary modeling to see what a range of based on current conditions 4 years later, based on what that range might look like now. And so we've updated it to the modeling to consider reduced reliability of CVP supplies, reduced district demands. Our East Bay Mud demands continue to drop to some degree. And then the range here from 56,000 acre feet up to 115,000 acre feet represents the difference between whether upcountry communities fully utilize their water right or whether they continue on a more more along their current path, I would say. So the higher number, the 115,000 acre feet, assumes that Amador, Calaveras counties use all of their water rights, and so there's less in the river for East Bay Mud. And the 56,000 acre feet represents a more reasonable level of development. And I think staff would anticipate that we'll be likely be on the lower end of these two numbers, closer to 56 than we are to 115. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in projecting 30 years into the future and not knowing the constraints that might be applied to some of our supplies along the way and with climate change. Overall, the district will be embarking on their 2025 Urban Water Management Plan modeling next year. That'll be a much more comprehensive analysis than what you're seeing today, but this gives us a range that we can anticipate need for water somewhere between 56 and 115, and most likely on the lower end of that scale. So what are the projects that are available to us to consider to meet that third year of drought need? And they really, we think of them in two different groups. The first group are the projects that can help meet our need for water by providing yield in each of the 3 years of the drought, years 1, 2, and 3 of the drought. And those include water transfers, future non-potable reuse, which by the way is already incorporated into the modeling, and then the potential for potable reuse, additional recycled water for potable use. And then below that are the 3 projects that are really the storage projects that are really designed and intended to only be used in that third year of the drought when it's most needed. And that includes Los Vaqueros, San Joaquin County Groundwater Banking, and Bayside Groundwater. Each of these projects, all 6 of them, have different yields. They have different limitations based on just the nature of each of the projects. They each have different strengths and weaknesses, different constraints, and different costs, and we're going to get into those in a minute. But these are really the main 6 alternatives that we would be considering when looking to meet that need for water out to 2050. So let's talk about unit cost, and we're presenting it's very difficult to get to an apples-to-apples comparison when you're talking about projects that deliver water every year versus projects that deliver water only in the 3rd year of a drought. So we've tried to estimate, get it to as close to apples as we can by using what we call dry year unit costs. What that means is that for recycled water projects in particular, although those projects deliver water to us every year, in terms of helping meet the drought need, they're only given credit 3 years out of 10, because those are the three drought years where we anticipate we're going to have a shortage that can be met with recycled water. So as a result, those costs look higher because we have to operate every year for a benefit only 30% of the time. And so these are the ranges of cost, unit costs for the different projects. Water transfers are the least expensive, partly because we've already made the investment in Freeport. So from here looking forward, the additional cost is less. We've got to pay for the water, and we've got to pay for to move it to the East Bay, but the rest of the infrastructure is already built. All the other projects have infrastructure costs associated with them. So these are the 3 projects that have yield in years 1, 2, and 3, and those unit costs. And then here are the unit costs that we've calculated for the storage projects. And so Los Vaqueros is the first column, then San Joaquin Groundwater Banking, and Bayside. They're all different sizes, but the unit cost identifies that Los Vaqueros is the most expensive of the 3. And you'll notice there are ranges for these. The range is supposed to reflect the frequency that we might use the water. The more we use the water, the lower the unit cost. So we use 2 different considerations. The first is based on our long-term average hydrology, how frequently might we use these drought projects in the 3rd year of a drought, and that's about 1 year in 15. So that's going to be the higher unit cost estimate. And then the lower unit cost estimate on these brackets is 1 year in 8. So if you look at maybe the last 25 years or so, droughts have happened a little bit more frequently. And so if that's the case going forward, and there's reason to believe it will be, that would indicate the lower unit cost because you're using the water more frequently, 1 year out of 8. And then on Los Vaqueros, the reason there are 2 different brackets for Los Vaqueros, the bracket on the left is based straight on the cost estimate for the project, the operating cost, everything's put into that unit cost. So that's the cost range based on the current best estimate of what the actual project will cost. But there is a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty around building a dam, even an expansion of a dam on top of an existing dam. So we wanted to reflect some of that risk in the cost estimate, and that's what the second bracket shows. It says dam cost times 2. So we've made an assumption. What if the dam costs double? What does that do to the unit cost? And you can see that it increases it from a range of $4,000 to $7,000 to a range of $5,500 to $10,000 per acre foot. But in either case, Los Vaqueros is the most expensive 3rd year drought alternative. There are more than cost considerations, and this chart reflects an assessment of some of the other criteria that staff considered in making the recommendation today. One is outcome control. Secondly, implementability. That's also has to do with complexity of the project. Supply assurance. So how certain are we to get the yield out of the project when we anticipate that we need it? And then finally, the fourth column is unit cost, which I've just shared with you in the previous slides. So, and the ranges, the green or number 1 are the most favorable ratings, and yellow is second, number 2, 3 is orange, number 3, and then the least favorable is the red, which is a number 4. And so, based on this evaluation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about how we came up with some of the different ratings for each of the projects, but based on this evaluation, overall, the Los Vaqueros project scores the lowest in terms of its overall ratings on all these 4 criteria. Any questions on that before I move on? Made an adjustment.
Yeah, I just have a question about, if you go back to, I think it's slide 9. Yeah, so you said water transfers are the least expensive because we've already paid for Freeport.
Yeah.
Once we, in the future, once we have, if we go to potable reuse, once we've built the facility and taken account of the infrastructure costs, would we then lower it? It seems, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the idea that we're not considering the, when we have our SCC charges for water, we factor in the cost of infrastructure that's gone before. So I guess I'm wondering a little bit about why, I mean, maybe I'm completely missing something, but it's like,
I hear that. The way I would say is it's a sunk cost, right? We've already paid for Freeport, or we're paying for it through debt, but we've already paid for Freeport. So what would it cost to get the next increment of water? For transfers, it's a small number because we use Freeport. For potable reuse, we've got to build new infrastructure first before we can achieve that same amount of water. So it has to do, we're not counting the sunk costs in this particular analysis. I don't know if that helped.
yeah, I mean, I would think that recycled water has Freeport has operational costs, and those are factored in the water transfer, right? I don't know, it's not really, Los Vaqueros still ends up being more expensive in most, all of these cases. I'm just thinking that if we have control over our infrastructure in some of these other alternatives, at some point, when we've paid for them, what we then have is operational costs and not the, sunk infrastructure costs. So it's just,
And I think, what Mike's, trying to say, if you look at, what is the overall cost of any particular project in the supplemental supplies, that would be a different looking graph. But what we're trying to say is now that we have an existing facility and we have other places where we don't have facilities, and we have to say, what is that next increment? Where do we want to spend that money if getting more transfers costs this much? And that's the comparison we're looking at.
Okay.
But there could be that retrospective look is, had we not built Freeport and we had to compare everything from scratch, the numbers would look different. But it's here, and we have to decide what's next. And
Right.
that what's next is this cost analysis.
So I guess the question that follows on from that is that you said that we're only counting recycled water in
3 out of 10.
3 out of 10, but in fact, we're using it every year.
Right.
So that offsets, that lowers our demand from, what we take out of Pardee. It reduces the amount of water that we need to get in a drought, et cetera. So why isn't that counted?
So there are operational savings on our potable system, but we do have to operate the recycled system. So those more or less cancel out. They don't exactly cancel out. There is in many years, I would say in close to half the years, we are making flood releases from Comanche. And the way to account for it is if we're putting extra water in through recycled water, that water effectively is being released down the river in half the years.
Okay, so if we didn't have recycled water, there'd be less water.
There'd be a little bit less in the river, that's correct. So there is an incremental benefit that's not included in the cost
Okay.
related to how much more is in the river.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah. Question about Bayside. I'm looking at the unit cost here, and so is this scenario the Bayside facility that's already there? I'm not sure what happened with the lease with Oraloma, or does this take into account the fact that we might have to build another well on our property?
This is actually the future, this is Bayside Phase 2. So the project that's in place there is Bayside Phase 1, which is a single well, and there is a need to relocate that well, given the expiration of the Oraloma lease, probably within a couple of years. And so Bayside Phase 2 is a larger project. It's a well field.
Okay.
Do you recall, Grace, there's 5 wells?
I think in WC 2040, they envisioned, I think, 10 wells.
10 wells, okay.
10 wells?
So it's a bigger project with probably a blending facility and those costs are based on the WSMP 2040. So they're old costs. They're about 10 years old, over 10 years old, but they've been escalated based on CPI. So we have their ballpark cost, I would say.
Okay, so, and when would that be? That
When-
we
when would
might
we be building this?
expand the.
It's
Bayside project?
it's within the capital planning, but it's not anytime soon because we need to operate Bayside Phase 1 for a while
Okay.
to gather additional information that will help the community understand why it works or whether or not there are any impacts to the local basin.
So 5 years?
I would say
2
5 to 10
years?
easily.
5 to 10
Easily,
years?
more than 5, probably 10 plus.
Has there been any progress on, with Oraloma in terms of keeping our well there for now? I know that there's a lot of discussion about it.
Where we are with Oraloma is the lease expired last week, and they've, through our conversations with their general manager, they're comfortable extending for 2 years to allow us time to remove the facilities from that property. But they are not interested in a long-term extension.
Okay, so we got a 2-year extension, but that's only for removal of our property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, going to continue moving here. Just as a conclusion, based on the modeling and kind of what I already shared, that with reduced upcountry demand, so if our need for water is toward the lower end, we can meet that need for water without Los Vaqueros if we have water transfers and San Joaquin groundwater banking available. So those two are enough to get us to that 56 or maybe a little higher than that. But to account for uncertainties in future need without Los Vaqueros, we'll need to plan for other supplemental supply options because we're not sure. We can't be certain that we'll be on the low end of that spectrum. So we should be prepared for other supplemental supply options that could include additional transfers and potentially the addition of potable reuse as an alternative. I'm going to turn it back over to Grace to talk about the Los Vaqueros agreements.
Okay, so over the past year and a half, staff have spent a significant amount of time developing and negotiating the key LVE project agreements. The district, along with the other member agencies, the JPA, have met multiple times with Contra Costa Water District to resolve the concerns, but the key issues still remain. In June, CCWD sent a letter to the general managers of the JPA member agencies and requested clarification on their commitment to the project. CCWD has asked for participation decisions by September, although the agencies currently have until August of next year to commit based on the latest project schedule. The letter indicated CCWD's firm position on the key outstanding issues in the agreements. Staff does not recommend that the district accept the current terms of the agreements based on the reasons outlined next.
And Grace, just correct, you said August of next year, you meant April, right?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yes, April of next year. Thank you for the correction. So the terms create cost and liability risks by limiting JPA controls. CWD doesn't consider itself a beneficiary of the dam enlargement. And furthermore, CWD wants to have overall decision-making authority during construction, while the district and the member agencies assume all financial and liability risks for the dam construction. The terms also create the risk of not receiving expected supplies because CWD will not guarantee delivery of water because it must serve its customers first. And finally, CWD has proposed an amendment to the JPA agreement to include a term that gives them veto rights over the JPA. And I'll hand it back over to Mike to talk about the participation options.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, so staff has come up with 3 potential options for the board to consider with respect to participation in Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion. The first would be that the district does not participate in the project, nor as a JPA member. Considerations there are that if we took this step to completely pull out of the JPA, we might be excluded from participating in the project in the future, which is still a possibility as long as we continue to be part of the JPA. Second option is that the district participates at its original 30,000 acre feet or considers a reduction to something less than 30,000 acre feet. We would still face, especially at the 30,000 acre foot level, that our upfront costs for the project, our capital cost expenditure would be in the range of $200 million. As Grace mentioned, some of the risks associated with dam construction and some of the uncertainty with whether or not supplies would be available at the times that we most need them, and some of the JPA agreement issues. And then the third option is that the district remains as a member of the JPA, but with an allocation of 0 storage. So we kind of remove ourselves from the capital project, we stay at the table, and we continue a part of the discussion, and importantly, we support the project in other ways, which I'll get into in a minute here. There would not be a cost share for EBMUD under this scenario, except for potentially administrative fees to be negotiated. And we could pursue a temporary or permanent assignment of available storage capacity in the future if one of the other JPA members were to make those available. So if the project evolves, and as we discussed at the planning committee, every supplemental supply project evolves and shifts and changes over time. We've seen that with Freeport and San Joaquin groundwater banking. If a project changes its course in some way, we'd still be at the table and available to re-engage if it was appropriate. I want to point out this note. Oh, go ahead.
Just one question here where it says we may have to pay JPA administration fees. You said that's negotiable, but how are those likely to be allocated if we don't have a percentage, or is just equally everybody pays?
Yeah, I don't know that it would be equal as everyone pays, because everyone else, or at least most of the other JPA members, are substantial beneficiaries of the project, which is the purpose of the JPA. So for us to be at the table, attending meetings, et cetera, I think the administrative costs would be quite small in comparison. But we haven't had that discussion with the JPA, and if it turned out that those costs were going to be split equally, 1/8 each, I think we would have concerns, and we probably would come back to the board to reconsider. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to point out the note at the bottom of this table. You may recall that there was potential grant funding from the California Water Commission, $23.7 million that would be partial funding of the Walnut Creek pumping plant upgrades that would support the project by allowing the district to more readily wheel water, deliver water to Contra Costa Water District through our system, if some of the partners wanted to, for example, use Freeport to divert some of their water. Certainly under option 1, and then particularly as well under option 3, there's a likelihood that the JPA would say that, well, EBMUD, you no longer need that $23.7 million. We're going to reallocate that to another part of the project. But that 23.7 million was meant to be spent on a project that would facilitate moving water for the partner agencies. So if it does not get funded and that project does not get constructed as a result, it just means there will be less opportunity for EBMUD to move water for those partner agencies in the future. And any of the costs associated with it, this would have helped reduce their costs for that wheeling and conveyance. Those costs would have to be recovered in another way through the conveyance charges that we would make. So although we would lose the funding, we would have a mechanism to recover costs for anything that we needed to do. All right, and lastly, the recommended actions. First bullet is to remain as a JPA member without allocated storage or reducing, in other words, reducing our storage allocation from 30,000 acre feet down to 0. But continue to support the project and participate by conveying water when capacity is available for the JPA member agencies, including supporting Contra Costa Water District during backstop, which is during construction of the project, with a negotiated agreement and full reimbursement to EBMUD, of course, consistent with our Freeport unassigned capacity principles approved by this board. And this recommendation was unanimously supported by the Planning Committee 2 weeks ago.
Any, Louis?
Okay, so, thank you for the report. I think it made it quite understandable. So if I'm reading this correctly, in the worst-case scenario, in 20 years, we would need to be able to come up with approximately 115 acre-feet of water to meet our need.
115,000.
That's on slide 7. And so I guess, in the worst-case scenario, if we had to plan for that, doing the math, it does appear that we would be able to meet our needs if all the other supplies materialize, including direct potable or potable reuse. So my question is, would 20 years be sufficient for us to be able to build the infrastructure that would be needed in order to materialize that additional amount of water?
That's a great question. I've been doing this work for several decades, and every one of these projects takes 10 years plus to complete. I think potable reuse in particular, and you're going to hear about this in a month at our Recycle Water Strategic Plan workshop, potable reuse in particular takes a long ramp-up time just on the outreach and community engagement piece before you even talk about the environmental permitting and design, et cetera. So that one in particular is going to be 10, 15 type of year time frame to get it to completion. But our belief is that with a 20-year lead time, we would have sufficient time to build the infrastructure that we need.
So a follow-up question would be, on slide 12, bullet number 1, it seems to me that we're assuming a reduced upcountry demand.
Yeah.
So how do we know that we can assume that?
That's a great question. Probably reduced is the wrong word. It's going to grow, our projection is going to grow slower than it would have to grow to get to their full water right entitlement. So the 115 assumes that they're going to, I believe, triple or quadruple their water use by 2050. And so staff felt that while that's on paper what they could do, it's not a trajectory that they're on right now. So that's why we came up with the estimate we came up with still includes growth upcountry, just not at the pace that it would take to use their entire water allotment.
Got it.
Excuse me.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that.
Okay.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I'm ready to make a motion
Okay.
that we approve staff's recommendation to remain as a JPA partner in the Los Vaqueros expansion project, but without using any storage.
Oh, Mike, so CCWD has been really arrogant in this entire process. So the benefit of remaining a JPA member without any allocated storage is what?
I would say that a couple of things. It will facilitate our continued support for this regional project, but mostly it allows us to stay at the table and continue to work with these partners if the project changes, if the agreements turn out differently than where they're currently going, or if, based on the allocations, there's a change in the cost structure. There could be a number of things that change about this project, and we've, as I mentioned, we've seen that happen with several projects that, or even projects that have completely, Freeport was maybe the fourth iteration of a project that when we were trying to get water from the American River. So, just being at the table, I think, is really the value that we get out of it, that East Bay Mud and its customers get out of this recommendation.
Right, and it's fully allowed for us to stay at the table.
Yes.
A JPA member without being a beneficiary.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe I'll just quickly add, I mean, I know you said CCWD is being arrogant about this. I might recharacterize that. I mean, CCWD has been very firm on their board-adopted principles and the need to protect their customers. And so that's understandable, but that creates problems for a project like this. So I don't want to characterize it that way.
Well, as a general manager, you shouldn't characterize it that way, but as a board member, I can't.
I understood.
And it's arrogant. They've been arrogant from the very beginning. So, having said that, Andy?
I haven't observed anything directly to make an accusation like arrogant, but I don't disbelieve it. I see that as objectively what I've experienced just at this table is there's zealous advocacy for a project that they see as important for their water future. And your analysis that staff and the committee have worked on really demonstrates that it's not that this isn't a worthy project for CCWD and other JPA members. It's just not the best fit for EBMUD, and it's not the best benefit for EBMUD's customers. So I'm glad to have had a studied, reasoned exploration of these issues now that we've gone along the journey just enough to know, is this the time to make a major capital decision or the time to remain a willing and available partner, but only if it's going to be appropriate for our unique needs. So thank you for all of those efforts. I have a couple questions. We may have to pay Joint Powers Authority administration fees. What is the scale of possible fees that we may be accountable for?
I'll let Grace at least
Well, I
explain what they are
Yeah, what they
today.
are. So in the pro forma for the project over the next 15 years, from 2025 to 2040, they project $4 to $5 million per year for JPA admin fees. Again, we have not negotiated what it would be if we are a participant at zero storage. We anticipate we would be far less than 1/8, as Mike had mentioned previously.
Yeah, it's I would certainly that's for all of the beneficiaries combined. So that doesn't give us a lot of clues into how what alternative approaches are there when there is no, our pro rata is zero. So hopefully we can start with the position of our entry is zero, and we certainly should chip in for any costs of mailing the agenda to us and supporting our showing up, paying for your lunch, whatever we should certainly pay our fair share for whatever costs we're actually causing them. But pro rata storage would not be appropriate, or maybe it would be if that calculates to zero. I do think that that's important to keep tabs on, just to make sure if it wasn't going to be fair, then we may need to reconsider even this level of participation. But I do think that there's this table may be talking about, regional reliability. There may be other things that happen in this circle that we still want to be around for. So I appreciate why we don't want to just completely leave the JPA or leave the table. But that was one. Thanks for answering that question. So hopefully we can get an update as soon as that's determined, and then understand what that means from there. And then the other thing I see on the slide for this participation options was the JPA may reallocate 23.7 of grant funding for Walnut Creek pumping plant. So what was that money really, intended? What's the source of that grant funding? Was it intended to support EBMUD, and now it's getting brought over to another, to not benefit EBMUD? Or was that funding really intended for a region? Does this mean that we should take a fair share of that funding in this reallocation? Or what, could you explain what the dynamics of that
I'll
grant?
try, and Grace, kick me if I say something wrong, but the 23.7 million is really to upgrade the Walnut Creek pumping plant facility so that it can facilitate EBMUD moving water for the partners. So the real beneficiaries are the partners, and it helps reduce their cost to later move water through our system. We're gonna charge them the full cost of what it takes to move the water. And if we built this facility, it would, they'd have more opportunity to move water. And then we would factor that, their capital contribution, into the wheeling costs that we would charge them. So EBMUD's not the direct beneficiary of that project, but I will say that's a project that's under consideration in our capital program, but it's, I'm gonna say, it's not a high priority for the district. It's around an $80 million project overall, so this 23 would have paid for part of it. And without that 23, I think there's a better likelihood that it won't make the cut when it comes to trying to determine our capital budget.
So even if we're not going to be participating in the JPA or the project, are we still anticipating to be wheeling water for it?
Yes, and I think, one of the recommendations, the second bullet there is meant that we would help move water for agencies, assuming we negotiate an agreement that everyone agrees on. So if they wanted to access Freeport to move wet year water into storage in Los Vaqueros, that could be available to them. And that's part of why this pumping plant project would have helped with that. And then also during the construction of the project, when Contra Costa has to drain Los Vaqueros Reservoir, and they need some protection from and so they need other sources of water, and that's what we call backstop. And so we would, as much as we had availability to do so, we could support that as well.
Okay, I think that it's good to understand. Our customers are very fortunate to enjoy the highest quality of water that can be achieved, and one of the risks of engaging in this project was the risks to integrating different types of sources and impossible impacts to water quality, especially if so understanding that as this goes further, it would be helpful just to understand what types of considerations does that mean for our system and our participation.
Marguerite?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag that for me, another reason for, aside from the ones that have been mentioned, to stay as part of the JPA in the project is there's a large degree of support from the environmental community related to the fisheries benefits associated with this project if it goes forward, and that we not send a signal that we don't think those benefits are important, because they are. And it may be that the project doesn't go forward, and if that's the case, what we're saying, I think, is that it's not us saying we don't want the project to go forward. We're just saying we don't staying on as with the JPA, offering still to backstop and provide capacity for conveying water to accomplish those regional benefits, I think says it sort of threads the needle. And if the project's going to fail, it won't fail because of us.
Marguerite, did you have a motion?
Yes, I did, and it was seconded by Director Gomez.
All right, and the motion, can you repeat it, please?
That we approve staff's recommendation to remain as a JPA member without allocated storage, and that we continue to participate in the JPA by conveying water when capacity is, that's what it says on the board, capacity when it's available, and, you know, obviously subject to continued negotiations around fees and that sort of thing.
Okay. If there's nothing further, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Grace. So we're going to move on to items 10 and 11. We did discuss this morning at the Finance Administration Committee meeting, and the committee did support staff's recommendation. We have Robbie Hanna here, our Treasury Manager, who will talk about the fiscal year 2025 financing plan and our proposed intention to authorize issuance of additional water system revenue bonds.
Okay, let's see. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. As the general manager said, we're covering items 10 and 11 here. So item 10 is authorizing the issuance of bonds over the next few years, and then 11 is our annual financing plan, which we bring around this time every year. So I will go right into it. We always start with an overview of the debt we have outstanding. The water system has about $2.7 billion in debt outstanding. Most of that, 89%, is fixed rate revenue bonds. 10% is variable rate commercial paper, and then 1% is state loans. On the wastewater side, it's a smaller system. It has less debt. We have $348 million in debt outstanding, and all of that is fixed rate revenue bonds. Our ratings are very high, as you've heard in the past. We're rated AAA on the water side by Moody's and S&P. And just as a reminder, we're the only California water agency rated AAA by Moody's. We're AA plus on Fitch, and then on the wastewater side, we have almost the same ratings, except that Moody's has us at the equivalent of AA plus, one notch down, but also very high ratings. So we'll start with the action to declare our intent to issue additional bonds. Every few years, we need to reauthorize the issuance under the MUD Act. And our practice is to do a certain amount of money authorized to allow us to do a number of bond issues over the coming years. And we last did this in 2015 when we added $653 million. And that brought the total at the time to $1.18 billion. But then we've been issuing bonds regularly, and each time we do that, it brings down this amount that's authorized. So eventually you get to the point where you need to do this again. So we last did it in 2015. In case, you know, I wasn't here then, but in case you don't remember it, it's because it was a while ago that we had to do this. Okay, so it's important to note that the board has many opportunities to weigh in on our bond issues besides this. So with this action, it's not like we can just go and issue $970 million. This is something under the MUD Act where we need to publish that we're doing this. But in reality, every time we bring a financing plan once a year, we're talking about debt. Of course, in the budget process, once every 2 years, we're talking about the debt and the capital plan and looking forward 5 and 10 years. And then actually the individual bond issues come before the board as well. So lots of chances to talk about debt, but we need to do this under the MUD Act to satisfy our ability to issue that debt. Okay? This is how we get to the math. We start with the 4 planned bond issues that were in our last budget, starting in 2025, so that adds up to $875 million. We've, in the past, put in an amount that would cover taking out our variable rate commercial paper if we ever had to do that. And then we add a 5% cushion, and that gets you to $1.2 billion, roughly. And then we have $223 million that's left over from that 2015, when we did this in 2015. And so that nets to $970 million. So that's the math to get to the $970 million today for this section. Okay. So then going into our financing plan, we always start with what we did last year. And one of the things we did, we issued $245 million in water revenue bonds for new projects. We refer to that as new money bonds. We also issued $181 million in refunding bonds to refund higher interest outstanding bonds to lower our debt service costs. On the wastewater side, we issued $25 million in new money bonds. And then in April, we extended our 2 liquidity agreements that support our commercial paper program. And then finally in May, we paid down $20 million in commercial paper. So relatively busy last year. Okay, so for our plan this year, under our budget, we're expecting to issue $275 million in new money bonds for this slide is for the water system. We plan to issue those as green bonds as we've done in the past. We've selected 4 underwriters from our pool to issue these bonds: Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Ramirez and Company. We're also targeting refunding up to $528 million in bonds for debt service savings. So these are bonds that are available to be called, and if we can call them and lower our interest costs, we will. And then also we're targeting, this is something that's been happening in the market, $400 million in refunding something called Build America bonds. These are bonds we issued back after the Great Recession. And we went into the detail on this at the Finance Committee today, but basically there's a subsidy that we get tied to them, but that subsidy is at risk at times of being taken away. And so if we can refund these, it kind of de-risks the portfolio from that subsidy being taken away and being replaced with what is normally are just traditional tax-exempt bonds. And then finally, we're budgeting to pay down at least $10 million in commercial paper. So that's the plan on the water side. On the wastewater side, under our budget, we're planning to issue $30 million in new money bonds this fiscal year. And again, these would be planned to be labeled green bonds like we've done in the past. We've selected 3 underwriting firms from our pool for this issue: Siebert, Barclays, and Academy. And we're also targeting $55 million in bonds to refund for debt service savings. So a smaller amount, but still meaningful, about $55 million we think we could refund. And then the wastewater system has $150 million in Build America bonds for the same reasons as on the water. We'll be looking at those as a chance to de-risk the portfolio. All right, and just a little more math. This just shows where under this plan where we'd end up by the end of the year. So the top line is our starting debt outstanding, and then you add the new money bonds that we've talked about. We're always paying down principal because there's always scheduled principal pay downs. We plan to pay down some commercial paper, and so at the bottom you can see it still is an increase in debt, but it's about $2.9 billion for water and $364 million for wastewater at the end of the year. Okay, this is the last slide. There's 2 recommended actions here. They probably have to be taken separately because one's a resolution, but it's to approve the declaration of intention to authorize additional water system revenue bonds. It's item 10, and then approve this financing plan for 2025, item 11. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And as we said before, both of these were presented at the Finance Committee this morning.
And what was the outcome?
The Finance and Administration Committee recommended approval of the proposed financing plan and also in the context of the bond notice.
All right. Is that a motion?
No, I've got a few questions. I just want to understand, I guess, first of all, we're all very proud of our credit rating. And I'm wondering if you can evaluate if this affects the credit rating at all or puts at risk that credit rating in any way?
So, you're probably referring to the fact that this increases the amount of debt we have outstanding. Right. Yeah. Yes. So I'll start with the 900.
Or anything else that I might not understand.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, that would be the the action here would lead to that. So the $970 million looks like a big number, but I mean, rating agencies would realize if they're even following this thing that this is like a MUD Act thing that allows us. We posted in the newspaper. There are provisions where if a certain number of people wrote in, they could stop it. Which would be highly unusual if has ever happened. So I don't think that number is going to, it's going to be what do we actually do? What are we going to actually issue in terms of bonds? And so that's the financing plan. And that's the $275 million on water and 30 million on wastewater. The rating agencies are aware that this is our plan. When we issued bonds in February, our official statement, the book that we have to basically publish about ourselves, said these exact numbers is what we plan to issue. So we're following the plan that they reviewed. So
So are you saying that basically these numbers are already baked into the credit ratings? So my assumption is the credit ratings is based in large part on our ability to pay off these bonds that we're taking on.
Yes.
So I guess the question really kind of gets to, does this affect in any way the risk that we're taking to pay these bonds off?
Because they read our documents closely and are looking at our financial projections, which include these, they are taking into account the fact that we were planning to do this. If we were to deviate far from our plan, then there could be issues. Now, there's also a million other factors. There's the economy and things like that, our SEC revenues, that all factor in when they review us each year. But the bond activity we're describing here is consistent with what we told the world 1 year ago when we did bonds. So this alone, I don't think.
So for that part, like I'm terming it's already baked into to their expectations.
Yes. Over time, we need to be careful about how much debt we issue, because while we have the highest ratings, we do have a lot of debt, and so we do a lot of analysis to see what can we do to be really careful with debt, basically, because obviously it has a cost impact.
Right. And does it in any way lock in a certain amount of rate increases that we're going to need to do in the future in order to pay this back?
That's a great question. It certainly locks in future budgets because we're going to pay it back. For 30, the bonds go out 30 years. I don't think you could say because of this. I mean, the debt you issue is not. It's usually pretty level or something around level. So it's not like one bond issue doesn't get more expensive over time. In general, we fit it in over our portfolios. It's a little more complicated than that. But I mean, it's going to have to be paid back under future budgets, and future budgets involve future rate increases. So that's why we're trying more and more to take a long-term view of this, incorporate the debt that we're issuing. I don't know if that directly answers the question. You can't say if you do this rate, I mean, it's going to mean the rates have to grow at this rate. In some ways, once you can cover it 1 year, you're kind of set up for future years. But, our plans right now involve issuing more debt in future years. So it's a part of our capital and financing plan right now, and we're mindful of trying to be careful about how much we issue.
Okay, that's very helpful. I found that explanation very helpful. The other question I have has to do with the category in the slides that call refunding, de-risking, evaluate refunding of up to $400 million in outstanding water system, 2010B Build America bonds for de-risking. What does that mean?
Okay,
exactly?
I'm happy to go into that. So during the Great Recession, there was a number of tools passed. Do you remember terms like shovel-ready and things like that? They wanted people to go out and do projects, to not hold back, to put money in the economy. And one of the programs, one of many, but one that hit municipal agencies like us or that benefited us, were Build America bonds. We call them BABs in our industry. I'm having trouble not calling them BABs. That's what we keep calling them. But they're Build America bonds. And the way they work is instead of issuing tax-exempt bonds, which is what we normally do, they allowed us to issue taxable bonds, which have a higher interest rate because the investors buying them are going to pay taxes on that interest. So we issued bonds with a higher interest rate, but then the federal government said, we will then, every time you pay interest to your investors, we will pay you an interest subsidy payment that is equal to 35% of the interest you paid investors. And net, that made our costs, when we were analyzing it, cheaper, a lower interest cost. Right. Because, just that 35%. The problem that no one saw coming was that when the federal government had budget issues through something called sequestration, they actually cut the subsidy. Today, it's not 35%. Now, it's not a lot lower than 35%, but it was sort of like, okay, so that wasn't, these are 30-year bonds, and, within I forget how soon, but within a couple of years, this happened. What's worse is that at times, it's at risk of being taken away altogether, the subsidy, when there are budget issues. And, each time, things have been figured out to keep them going. And so, if it was ever taken away, why are we sitting here, with these taxable bonds? And so right now in this interest rate environment, and it's a complicated mix of tax exempt and taxable rates. It's this ratio. People have been finding it. It's been a common thing to do in the last year, have been able to refund these with tax exempt bonds. And what you've done is you've just eliminated this risk. You don't have to think about it.
So we essentially paying off these bonds with the new bonds that we're
Exactly.
putting out there.
You would have new bond, the numbers won't end up being 400, but you'd have an equivalent amount, roughly equivalent amount of new tax exempt bonds, and you will pay off the existing bonds.
So does that mean, in essence, I mean, to the extent that we do that, we're not taking on additional debt? I mean, we're not taking on the full 900 and something million additional debt?
That's right, yeah, so it's 400 million, but you're adding the two refundings together in this
Right.
slide, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right, we're not, you would consider both of those not an increase in your debt, and probably a decrease, especially on the 528 million, because you're doing that for, you'll end up, then some funny things happen with when you sell bonds, you sell them at premiums and discounts, but at the end of the day, you're not increasing your debt. And with the 528 million, you'd be doing it because you're reducing your interest you're paying, the debt service you pay. For the 400 million, you're reducing risk and maybe some debt service. There might be some savings. It's just probably even the bigger benefit is not worrying about this subsidy being taken away.
That could be taken.
And for what it's worth, that 970 million that on the one item, that under the MUD Act, we don't, for these refundings, those don't even count towards that. Meaning because they're kind of swapping debt for debt, they don't draw down that. So it's kind of another way to say it doesn't add to our debt. The 275 million, that definitely adds to our debt. The 275 on this slide.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And
Marguerite.
Yeah, there was a question this morning from, I think Eric Larson, asking about Wells Fargo, which, I mean, this board did take an action to limit or end business with Wells Fargo some years ago, where we, can you kind of provide any status on that?
Yeah, I can give, I think it was 2016 when, the things that we all read about in the news that Wells Fargo was doing, this board took action to suspend certain services with them, and that included this service, underwriting. And this, I think the state did the same, a few other places did the same. Actually, in 2020, the board took action to remove that suspension. So yeah, we, certainly during that time, we were not able to entertain any bids for this service from Wells Fargo. We went back and read that resolution, and there were certain things. Wells Fargo obviously paid giant penalties. I think our message. I think the message landed. That we were suspending service. By bringing it back, and this was at the board in 2020, it brings back competition for this business, and they actually came in with a really strong bid. They're a strong underwriter in this space. Everyone else that we can see has if they haven't even had a suspension, have dropped it. So they've worked with Los Angeles, SFPUC, the state, UC Regents, and so based on the action in 2020, and they're really honestly really strong bid here. That was this was the result.
Yeah, I sort of remember that they were a remarkable number of basis points lower than anybody else in terms of their underwriting costs in that 2020 scenario.
Well, at times they've bid on things at very, and this is one example where it was very, very competitive. When we did that action in 2020, there wasn't anything in front of us to hire them, so we didn't hire them at that time. There were no bonds issued in 2020. They've done other service for. We used to have these things, these variable rate debt and they were one of the dealers for that. They were always they were strong participant in that. So that's the history there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Is under new leadership and of Charlie Scharf, and I think that next year the asset cap is going to be lifted by the Federal Reserve. So how long do we want to punish them? That's my comment.
That's my understanding.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We lifted it in 2020.
2020, right.
Okay, all right.
Actually, the asset cap has been on for 5 years. I just saying.
And for, I think it would be helpful, just to clarify this for ourselves and for the member of the public who made the request, if we can just get a memo reminding us what the circumstances were for reinstating after the suspension in 2020.
We could do that.
Okay.
Okay.
And so, yeah, if you could take the items individually, 10 and 11.
All right. We have a motion.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Vice President Patterson, a second by Director Young. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
And then item 11, since we're taking them separately.
Okay. Item 11,
I'll move.
I'll second.
okay. Anything further? There's nothing further. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. And I don't have anything under general manager report. At your places is a speakers bureau, and that's the end of my reports.
Wow. All right. Committee reports. The meeting minutes for the August 13th, 2024 Planning and Ledge HR Committee meetings and the August 20th, 2024 Special Finance Administration Committee meeting were provided in your agenda materials. We will now receive an update from this morning's Finance Administration Committee. Director Katz.
Yes, Madam President, the Finance and Administration Committee reviewed the fiscal year 2025 financing plan and the notice of bond issuance that the board just approved. The board also reviewed the governance policies and provided detailed feedback on a table of contents for a board governance handbook that would be the form of our work as a board to have a board governance package, and that would also accompany some revisions to our board ethics policy, our board of directors reimbursement policy, and a new whistleblower policy that would be applicable to the entire agency, not or would clarify that it applies to the whole agency and not just the board of directors. So we reviewed that. And so we will be continuing our review of that in a month at our next committee meeting. And some of these items may be referred to the full board for early deliberation pending the board president's determination of the board schedule.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Please submit items for future consideration to the general manager and his office. Director comments. Thank you if you've already submitted your written comments to the secretary. Are there any verbal director comments or reports?
Under the future agenda items for consideration, I requested that we include the UMRA, report on activities at UMRA in an upcoming planning committee meeting.
All right. Any other comments or reports? All right. Hearing none, seeing none. The next regular meeting of the Board of Directors will be held Tuesday, September 10th, 2024 at 1:15 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.